by chaos.
We are talking Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2. Once again directed by Frake-Waterfield, who directed the first movie, and produced by Scott Jeffrey, who produced the first movie along with dozens of other films. And he actually stars in this movie as Christopher Robin, but uses his real name, Scott Chambers. Now, before I go any further, I do have to point out two things that is going to be a little different with this review compared to the majority of reviews I do here. Number one, I am going to talk about some spoilers in this review. I'm not going to out and out spoil every plot detail and tell you what happens at the end, but some of the points I want to talk about will involve talking some spoilers. I will be as vague as I can and give away at least as information as I can help, but there will be some spoilers. And number two, and most different really, is going to be, this is going to have a business discussion about this movie, the production company and the franchise, and some speculation on my part. And then of course we'll review the movie as well. So a little different, so we expect a bit of a longer video than normal. First of all, let us go through the story of this movie. Now, this is actually a reboot. So the original movie was a kind of fictional version of real life events according to this one. So this movie starts off and we learn that the first movie exists in the universe that the Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey Part 2 takes place in, as a kind of a fictionalized version of the events that have happened in the past in this particular area. So that movie is completely fictional, although it is based on the events that happen to the characters in this part 2, if that makes sense. A little bit like the Stab movies fit in with the Scream franchise, if you're familiar with that. So it's effectively a reboot. If you remember from the first movie, Christopher Robin was killed off. Here he's alive, he's played by a different actor, so none of the events exactly have happened as we have seen him in the first movie. So all we know that there have been some type of kind of massacre. We don't know exactly what has happened because they do say that the events as depicted in the first movie are not true to what actually happened in air quotes real life. We just know that there was some type of massacre. Christopher Robin was involved, and as such he has this kind of black cloud that is hanging over him. Everyone kind of associates him with these kind of murders. He's trying to work as a doctor, but he's getting a lot of hassle because of it. And we learn that the creatures which are referred to in this movie as hybrids are still out in the woods. And some people believe that they're there, some people don't. But they are there, and they are actually the result of genetic manipulation. And in this instance, in the second movie, we actually have a couple more characters in the form of Owl and Tigger as well. So these creatures are effectively now going on a rampage once more, killing people because they feel people are encroaching on their kind of habitats. At the same time, we've got Christopher Robin trying to find out what has happened. Maybe he has a connection to these creatures from his past, perhaps something to do with his brother that went missing many, many years ago when he was a child, and his investigation about where it's all kind of going. So what will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So, before we get into the review, let's talk about a couple of things, shall we? So, when the original movie came out, at that point I had reviewed many Jagged Edge production films. Now, Jagged Edge Production is the production company that is owned by Scott Jeffrey, aka Scott Chambers. And they have produced many films that have been based on public domain properties. Jack and Jill, Humpty Dumpty, to name but a couple. But none of them really ever got the exposure that Winnie the Pooh did. So Winnie the Pooh came out, and he got a lot more of media attention than anticipated. And we're going to talk about that again in a moment. And once the original movie came out, Jagged Edge put a tweet out, and they're basically saying, tell us what you want to see in the sequel. And I actually replied, and check this out, I'd reboot the idea. And lo and behold, they've rebooted the idea. Just saying. Just saying. So there you go. I mean, I think it was actually the smart move to do that, and I'll explain a little bit why in a moment. But yes, I just wanted to point that out. So there you go. But I also want to talk about the impact of this movie and how this kind of came to be. So let us cast our minds back. So as I've mentioned, Jagged Edge Productions, along with other companies, have produced many movies based on public domain properties, and most of them just chug along. You know, they just kind of go under the kind of the radar effectively. Now, they had produced Winnie the Pooh, the original Blood and Honey movie, and then all of a sudden it started to get a lot of media attention. Now, because of this, I think the film company saw the opportunity to think, okay, this could actually be a little bit of a sleeper hit, because unexpected, I mean, Jagged Edge produced a lot of films, and I don't think they were expecting this one to be kind of picked up so quickly and so broadly with mainstream media, that this kind of this Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, the original one we're talking about now, was going to get so much attention. And as such, they went and did some reshoots. Now, the movie was low budget, so I'm going to show you a graphic here with the financials about this movie. Now, according to IMDb, the budget for the original movie was £100,000. Now, I actually think it was less than that, because I did see an interview with I think it was either Scott Chambers or Frake-Waterfield, who said the budget, including reshoots, was £35,000 to £40,000. So I think this 100,000 budget is a little expanded. But you can see here that the actual movie worldwide took in close to $5 million. So quite a good return on investment there. So obviously it was a very low budget shoot. I think it was far less than £100,000, and it's made close to £5 million because of this large media exposure. Now, of course, a sequel is inevitable at this point, but unfortunately, I think with the sequel, the novelty factor has kind of worn off, to be honest with you. So the reported budget for the second movie was $1 million. Now, I don't know if that's true, because, as I say, I think the actual, and this again is from IMDb, the budget, I know the budget was less than the first one was reported. So it was obviously higher budget, but I don't know if it was $1 million budget, to be honest with you. But if you look at the worldwide gross there, it did just over $1.5 million on the worldwide gross. This is a higher budget sequel that actually did not as much money, not even like, half of what the original did. So the lightning was effectively in the bottle with that first movie. Now, the problem I have with a lot of these low budget kind of studios, and Jagged Edge Productions, the perfect example, is they just churn out so many films and they're all the same. And the original movie, even though it had some reshoots, was just one of those. Just their movies are always a bunch of girls go into a house, gets chased around by a monster, and one of them survives. It's kind of the same thing over and over again. And Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, the original, was no different. Yes, they tried to add a few kind of like scenes with Christopher Robin that were reshoots to kind of like give it a little bit more of a higher budgeted, because of the attention this movie got. But to be honest with you, it was not a good movie, and it really showed, because it was made just to be a quick turnaround. And I've said to filmmakers 1 or 2 times before, maybe not make as many, but make a better one. Take your time and make these kind of movies a little bit better, and you might end up kind of building the audience a little more. But that isn't what happened. Obviously they just kind of made this movie, and yes, it was a bit of a flash in the pan. They made lots of money out of it, but people were burned. People thought, hey, it's just a load of old rubbish. So when we get to the second one, yes, it's a higher production value, and we'll talk about that in the actual review part of this in a moment. But it was the kind of the novelty had worn off that at this point. I know they tried to do this kind of shared universe with Bambi and things like this and Pinocchio. And we'll see how those do. But the novelty of a killer Winnie the Pooh has, by the second one, all but kind of died off. So it was like, had they just kind of maybe made the effort the first time and produced a better movie, kind of, I mean, I know we're going to talk about it, but I think the second movie is an improvement. But had they made a movie like that initially, they might have had more of a genuine kind of cult hit. So, you know, there it is. So it's a shame really that these film companies, and they still do it to this day, continue to pump out these quickies to make a little bit of money on a lot of movies, when you never know really when you potentially could have a little bit of a hit, and because you've made it quickly and cheaply and not really cared, you know, that potential to kind of up your profile, so to speak, is wasted. Anyway, thus ends the business kind of like speculation on my part there. So what's this movie like? What is the plus points of this second movie? So as my recommendation, they did reboot it, which I thought was the best move, to be honest with you, because I think they wasted the character of Christopher Robin in that first movie. And as I say, Jagged Edge Productions continuously just have movies about a bunch of girls in a house, and I think they've used the same house in this one, let me just say. But nonetheless, it's just the same formula time and time again. They have tried to do something different here, and I do give them props for that. And one thing well, there's a few things where I do for this movie has moved forward on. So the character of Christopher Robin is a lot more fleshed out than 90% of the movies coming out from Jagged Edge Productions. We do feel like we get some character development on this one. I actually think Scott Chambers is a reasonable actor. He's actually quite a subdued actor in regards to his performance of Christopher Robin, quite subtle. It's kind of quite softly spoken, but he comes across as quite a naturalistic sort of character. I actually quite liked his character of Christopher Robin in this movie. His relationship with his parents, his relationship with the sister. I thought, you know, and again, we got to bear in mind, even though this is a higher budget than the original, it's still a low budget movie. So I thought the characterization element was better. The pacing of this movie is a little bit more considered, and although arguably it does slow down in some places, the plot I think moves forward at a reasonable pace, because we do have this kind of mystery that Christopher Robin is going on, trying to find out what has happened in his past, which gives I think the movie a little bit more going on than the typical just kind of like monsters chasing people around, although there is that as well. Let's talk about those monsters, because one thing I will feel this movie does, and I've seen a lot of divisive comments about this, because I'm doing this review a little later than most. You know, there's a lot more gore in this movie. There's a lot more kills, and you know, I've seen a lot of people say, oh, just because it's got higher budget effects and more kills doesn't make it better. But I've also seen people on the other side going, it's just, you know, a gory, kill-filled movie with lots of kind of splatter and blood effects. So this is going to be somewhat of a, if you are interested in those type of movies. This to me feels more like a classic kind of like indie slasher splatter movie. Now I think the actual fact that it's the Winnie the Pooh movie and a sequel to the original is somewhat of an albatross around this movie's neck in that respect, because I think people are expecting to do something more clever with the concept. But I think if you are a slasher fan, and I think this is a movie that you'd really enjoy, because I really do feel like there's lots going on here. There's lots of kills. I mean, the body count in this one is massive, let me just tell you. And I do think there are some fairly effective kills. I mean, some of them are a little generic ultimately, but I think there are some good ones as well. We get a variety of different kind of like creature characters. The VFX are, for the most part, pretty good. There are a couple of instances where you have CGI blood and things, but CGI Tigger's tail and stuff like that. But, you know, again, it's a lower budget movie. So I do think the production value, certainly in regards to the script, is improved. I think the production value in regards to the VFX is improved. I think it's shot relatively well. Now, one thing I would say about the Jagged Edge Productions is they produce so many movies. I do think they have quite an experience behind the cameras team. Because their movies, although they are very cheap, they're relatively well shot sometimes. And this is no different. And there is some nice cinematography here, which I thought was quite good. There are some good performances in this movie. I quite liked, as I say, the Christopher Robin character. I quite liked his relationship with his parents. You'll see a couple of Scott Jeffrey regulars in regards to some of the cast members, including his mum. But you know, they have pulled out a few good performances in the past with Scott Jeffrey's productions. Scott Jeffrey, Scott Chambers, same person. So there is that. The actual prosthetic, the makeup, I suppose is improved, or at least that I would feel with the general consensus. I actually didn't mind the mask in the first movie, but I assumed it was someone in a mask, if that makes sense. So here they're meant to be more genetic mutations, and hence the spoiler part of it. So they kind of look a little bit more to them. I didn't love the design of Owl, I have to say, but you know, yeah. I mean, I suppose, you know, critically speaking and objectively speaking, the effects here are a little better. And then just story-wise, I think there's a little bit more kind of going on, what's happened with the kidnapping and the children. I don't think it's fully fleshed out, and we'll talk about that again in a second. But at least there is a little bit more going on than just kind of like people getting chased around by monsters, which is the bulk of these type of films. Okay. So let's talk about what didn't work. So let's discuss the reboot idea here. The problem I have, the way it was handled, I think the reboot was the way to go, because the first film was such a generic, crappy, low budget, stitched together movie. Following on from that would be difficult. So having a rebooted idea with a better Christopher Robin was the smart move. The issue I have with it is I really didn't know the context about what had happened between Christopher Robin and the Hundred-Acre Wood creatures before this point. Christopher Robin doesn't actually meet Pooh in this movie until an hour and 20 minutes into the film, which is nearly the end. And we don't know if we're led to believe, according to this movie, the original film, as I say, was a adaptation of the real events that had happened in this universe. But we don't know the real event in that case, because of this, we all know that there was a film and they've changed some things. So what actually happened, we don't actually know. So I don't know the relationship in this movie between Christopher Robin and the Pooh and the rest of them, because it never really establishes that. In actual fact, we get very little interaction between the Christopher Robin character and these creatures. He's more on his own thing, tracking down what had happened to his brother and stuff like that. And although I kind of appreciated the fact that we have this plot, which is kind of giving a little bit more meat on the bones, a little bit more backstory, and ultimately it is setting up the origin, so to speak, of these creatures. You know, and he's going into hypnotherapy, and he's like remembering who took them and things like that. But it's like, so we know that the creatures existed from when they were both children, but I'm really not really sure about the relationship. He obviously knows who they are and has interacted with them, but we're not given really any information. So I really felt that was kind of not established very well, if that makes sense. So the status quo of this movie with our characters at the beginning, I didn't really feel like I got to know where all the starting points of them all were. We hear the creatures talk about Christopher Robin, so they obviously have had interactions. And if we're to effectively disregard the first film, we don't know the interactions. It's kind of a little frustrating, I have to say. Now, I think it was a mistake to have Christopher Robin on his own little side quest ultimately, and not running into our creatures until so late in the movie. This should have been brought, you know, they should have met in the second act, I would have said, and had interactions. You might not have had this big confrontation until the end, but certainly I would have established a little bit more connectivity between these kind of like Christopher Robin and this group of creatures. I have to say, I think the group of creatures that they just seem, again, generic killing machines. The kills are quite fun. There's quite a lot of them, but we learn that they are genetic experiments, but we don't really know what it is they want, why it is they're doing things. Do you know what I mean? They can communicate, they can talk, but we don't. They're really not given anything that resembling a character, to be honest, and. You know, they are just monsters that we're told are the kind of the Winnie the Pooh characters, you know, Owl, Tigger, Piglet, etc. But they don't really have any like facets of those original characters, or even stuff which has been introduced that relates to the kind of the Christopher Robin character, or their own motivations completely outside of that. So they could have been anything, to be honest. In a way, I do think the fact that this is a Winnie the Pooh movie does attract people who are maybe outside of the horror space, that will just kind of like poo-poo this movie as a load of old rubbish, who kind of aren't familiar with a lot of independent B movies, so I will say that. But, you know, some of the critiques I would say are kind of valid. The creatures, I would say, are not distinct enough. They're all kind of angry and kind of growly and sweary. They don't really have distinct sort of personalities. I mean, we're meant to believe that the owl is the kind of the smarter one, or the leader, but it doesn't really translate, and he kind of looks the worst. The costume, we're meant to believe that he's flying with this kind of like ratty old small wings, but like he looks more like a vulture. But yeah, I don't really like the design of the kind of the owl character, I have to say. And Tigger is barely in this movie, so you know, so just bear that in mind. So you know, there's missed opportunities there, I would suggest. Some of the side characters just don't register at all. We have this kind of blonde female love interest, and I just didn't really. The relationship between her and Christopher Robin, I didn't really feel was particularly well established. There's a kind of a smattering of other friends that are just there to get killed off, and I'm thinking, these characters, they're just like red shirts. They're non-characters. They're just there to kind of like fill a quota and things like that. So it's an improvement on some areas, I would suggest. It's certainly in production, and those who want visceral thrills and blood, you know, blood and kills. There is that. There is an attempt to have a little bit more depth, and I did appreciate that. So yes, I do think this is an improvement. I do think this is actually a watchable movie. I think it comes with ultimately now more baggage, because I think this gets compared to, you know, more mainstream kind of films, and it's not the same mindset. I would compare this more to like another like low budget slasher movie, and that's more of a like for like comparison. You know, the mainstream critics and stuff probably won't watch that sort of stuff. So, but they're watching this and comparing it to sort of the more, you know, higher budgeted mainstream films. So, you know, this is why I've tried to go a little bit more in depth in this one. So should you watch it if you haven't already seen it? If you are a kind of a slasher fan, you like, you know, lots of kind of kills on the screen, I think you'll enjoy it. There is an attempt here to have a little bit more going on, and I appreciated that. I think they've missed the mark somewhat, and I actually think had they had this story and it be not Winnie the Pooh, it probably would have been, you know, hadn't had the crap that it's got. But it is, and that's the world we live in. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. So it's an okay independent slasher movie that does improve it, and I do hope they continue to kind of maybe put a little bit more into their films going forward. I would love it. I would love it if they did that. So 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What were your thoughts on it? Do leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.